Paul Sanderson, a very shy millionaire nerd, hires Linda Miller, his half-brother's babysitter, to pretend to be his girlfriend at the prom. But no one expected that. What if a fake relationship starts to feel more real than they ever imagined? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Paul Sanderson sat in his spacious office, a sleek modern space filled with the latest technology and cluttered with high-tech gadgets that seemed to whisper his success in the startup world. The soft hum of computer fans and the glow of multiple screens surrounded him, yet he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. Despite being a millionaire at such a young age, Paul was painfully aware that his social skills were lacking. His success had come at the cost of friendships and romantic relationships, leaving him with a deep-seated loneliness that he couldn't shake off. He stared at the email invitation to the high school prom, which had landed in his inbox that morning, as if it were a ticking time bomb. A part of him wanted to delete it immediately, but another part was curious. It stirred a mix of emotions he had long buried under layers of code and business meetings. He had never attended a prom, never danced under the twinkling lights of a grand hall, and certainly never had a date. The thought of attending the event alone, as he always did, felt unbearable. What am I even thinking? He muttered to himself, running a hand through his tousled hair. Just then, his phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from his half-brother, Jake. "Hey bro, you coming to the prom? It's going to be fun. You should totally go." Paul sighed, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Fun, he thought. For him, the word felt foreign, almost mocking. He typed a quick reply, "Yeah, maybe. Not sure yet." As he stared at the screens, his mind began to drift. He remembered the countless nights he spent coding his way to success, the sacrifices he made, and the friends he lost along the way. But as the memories washed over him, one face emerged from the haze. Linda Miller. She was the charming babysitter for Jake, a young woman with an infectious laugh and a bright spirit that always seemed to lighten the atmosphere. They had exchanged pleasantries, but he had never taken the time to know her beyond those brief encounters. What if? The idea sparked in his mind, lighting a path he had never considered. What if he asked Linda to be his date for the prom? It would solve his dilemma and perhaps give him a taste of what it felt like to have someone by his side in a social setting. But could he really ask her? He could already feel the anxiety creeping in at the thought of making such a proposal. Meanwhile, at a local cafe downtown, Linda Miller sat across from her friend Sarah, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The cafe buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the aroma of freshly baked pastries. Linda stared out the window, lost in thought, her mind a jumble of hopes and frustrations. "Earth to Linda." Sarah waved a hand in front of her face, breaking her reverie. "What's going on with you? You've been quiet all morning." Linda sighed, finally focusing on her friend. "I don't know, Sarah. It's just, my love life is a mess. All the guys I meet seem more interested in appearances than anything meaningful." Sarah raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. "You mean like that guy from the gym who barely looked at you while flexing in front of the mirror?" "Exactly," Linda exclaimed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's like no one sees past the surface. I want someone who actually gets me, you know? Someone who cares about who I am beyond my looks. Maybe you need to put yourself out there more?" Sarah suggested, taking a sip of her coffee. "Join a club or something. Or even go to that prom everyone's talking about." Linda rolled her eyes at the mention of prom. "Please, I'm not exactly the prom queen type. I'd probably just stand in a corner, nursing a drink, feeling awkward, or you could have a date." Sarah shot back, a mischievous glint in her eye. "What if you went with someone who could actually make it fun?" Linda laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Yeah, right. Who would want to go with me?" Just as she spoke, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and saw a message from Jake. Her heart raced a little. He was cute, but they had never really interacted much beyond pleasantries. The message read, "Hey, you should totally come to the prom. It'll be fun. Bring a date." "See? Even Jake thinks I should go," Linda said, glancing at Sarah, who was beaming at her. "But I can't just show up without a date. That would be even more embarrassing." "Then get a date. Sarah insisted. What about that cute guy from your class? Or maybe you could ask someone else. Linda pondered for a moment, her mind drifting back to Paul Sanderson. She had seen him around, a quiet genius who seemed to prefer the company of his gadgets over people. I don't think Paul would ever want to go with me, she said, a hint of disappointment lacing her voice. He's probably busy with his startup or something, but he's your half-brother's brother. You could totally ask him. Sarah encouraged, her eyes lighting up with excitement. And if he says no, just brush it off. You won't know unless you try. Meanwhile, back in his office, Paul's heart raced at the thought of contacting Linda. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation that would change everything. He quickly typed a message to her, his fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. Hi, Linda. It's Paul. I hope you're doing well. I was wondering if you might be free to talk about something. After hitting send, he felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. What if she said no? What if she laughed at him? The idea of rejection gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself of the urgency of the situation. A few minutes passed, and he found himself refreshing the chat window repeatedly, his heart pounding. When her reply finally came through, it felt like a jolt of electricity. Hey, Paul. I'm doing well. What's up? He took a moment to gather his thoughts before responding. I was wondering if you would consider helping me with something. It's a bit out of the ordinary, but I could really use your assistance. The dots on the screen danced as she typed back, Sure. What do you need help with? Paul hesitated, the weight of his proposal pressing down on him. He took a deep breath, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I was wondering if you would be willing to pretend to be my girlfriend for the prom. Silence fell on the other end, and Paul could almost hear her processing the request. He quickly added, I know it sounds strange, but I get really anxious in social situations, and I thought it might be easier if I had someone with me who could help me navigate it. After what felt like an eternity, her response came back, Wow, that's definitely unexpected. But I have to admit, I'm intrigued. Why me? Paul could sense her hesitation, but also her curiosity. It gave him a glimmer of hope. I think you'd be great at it. You have a way of making people feel comfortable, and I've seen how you interact with Jake. It would mean a lot to me. There was a brief pause before she replied. All right, I'm in. This could be an interesting adventure. As Paul read her message, a smile broke across his face for the first time that day. Perhaps this prom wouldn't be as lonely as he had imagined. Little did they both know that this decision would set into motion a series of events that would change their lives forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the city, Paul Sanderson sat in his sleek, modern apartment, feeling more anxious than ever. The prom night was just days away, and he had agreed to the arrangement with Linda, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. He glanced at his reflection in the window. A mix of excitement and apprehension mirrored back at him. Would he be able to pull this off? Meanwhile, in a cozy little cafe downtown, Linda Miller was preparing for their meeting. She fiddled with her phone, checking the time repeatedly. She had spent the entire afternoon trying to come up with ways to make their fake relationship feel more authentic. As she sipped her caramel macchiato, she thought about what it meant to play the role of Paul's girlfriend. Was it merely a facade? Or could it turn into something more genuine? When they finally met at a park nearby, the air was thick with anticipation. Paul wore a casual outfit, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he normally favored for business meetings. Linda, dressed in a light summer dress, gave off an effortless charm. As they approached each other, Paul's heart raced. Hey, Paul, she greeted, her voice warm and inviting. Hi, Linda, he replied, his tone tentative. Thanks for meeting me. Of course. So, where do we start? She asked, tilting her head slightly, her curiosity piqued. Paul took a deep breath. I was thinking we could, I don't know, outline how we want to play this out? I mean, it's a prom, so there will be a lot of expectations. What do you think? Linda nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. That sounds good. Let's make a list. We can cover things like how we met and what our story is. Do you have any ideas in mind? Maybe we could say we met at a coffee shop, he suggested, feeling more comfortable as they brainstormed. Perfect. And we can say we've been dating for a couple of months, Linda added enthusiastically. It'll help us avoid too many questions. As they continued to discuss their cover story, the conversation flowed more easily than either had anticipated. They shared anecdotes about their childhoods, their families, and even their dreams for the future. Paul discovered that Linda had a passion for art and wanted to become an illustrator, while Linda learned about Paul's ambition to innovate technology that could change the world. "Wow, you're really passionate about what you do," she remarked, her eyes sparkling with interest. "I admire that." "Thanks," Paul said, surprised by her genuine interest. "I sometimes feel like I'm just a tech nerd in a world of social butterflies." Linda laughed lightly. "Well, you might be a tech nerd, but you're a cool one. I mean, look at your apartment," she gestured around, taking in the cutting-edge gadgets and sleek design. "It's impressive." Paul felt a warmth spread through him at her compliment. "I guess it's just what I'm good at," he replied, a hint of shyness creeping into his voice. "But I've never been good at the social part." "Well, we'll figure it out together," Linda said reassuringly. "You just need someone to show you the ropes." Just then, a group of teenagers strolled past, giggling and whispering. One of them pointed at Paul, recognition lighting up their eyes. "Isn't that Paul Sanderson?" one boy exclaimed. "Yeah, the tech millionaire. What's he doing here?" A girl chimed in, her tone dripping with disdain. Paul's shoulders tensed as he tried to ignore the whispers. Linda noticed and swiftly stepped closer to him, her expression a mix of defiance and protectiveness. "Ignore them," she said softly, her voice firm. "They don't know you like I do." Paul looked at her, surprised. "Thanks, Linda. I guess I'm just used to being the butt of jokes. It's hard to shake off." "Then let's give them something to talk about," she said with a playful smile. "You'll show up to prom with me, and they'll be shocked." The plan was set, and as they wrapped up their meeting, a newfound camaraderie blossomed between them. They even shared a laugh about the idea of pretending to be a couple, and for the first time, Paul felt a flicker of hope that maybe this arrangement would lead to something more than just a charade. A few days later, the pair met again, this time at an upscale men's clothing store. Paul had agreed to let Linda help him pick out a suit for the prom, a task that made him both excited and nervous. As they browsed through the racks, Linda's enthusiasm was infectious. "How about this one?" she asked, holding up a sleek navy suit. "It's classy but not too formal. Perfect for prom." Paul inspected the suit, hesitating. "I don't know. What if it's too much?" "Paul, you're going to prom. You need to look the part," Linda insisted, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Trust me, you'll thank me later." After some gentle persuasion, Paul tried on the suit. As he stepped out of the dressing room, Linda's eyes widened. "Wow, you look amazing," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. Paul adjusted his collar, feeling a mix of embarrassment and pride. "Really? I mean, it's just a suit." "It's not just a suit. It's a statement," she replied, crossing her arms and nodding approvingly. "You should feel confident in it." Just then, the store's door swung open, and in walked a group of Paul's former classmates, their laughter echoing through the shop. Paul's stomach sank as he recognized them. They had always been the popular crowd, and he had always felt invisible among them. "Look who it is," one of the boys sneered, eyeing Paul with a smirk. "The tech genius trying to play dress-up. What a joke." Another chimed in, clearly enjoying the moment. Paul felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a familiar wave of anxiety washing over him. But before he could retreat, Linda stepped forward, her posture straight and her expression fierce. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady. "You have no idea what he's accomplished. He's a millionaire and has a successful startup. What have you done lately?" The group fell silent, taken aback by her sudden defense. Paul's heart raced, both in surprise and gratitude. He had never seen anyone stand up for him like that before. "Who are you? His girlfriend now?" One of the boys scoffed, trying to regain control of the situation. "Yes, I am," Linda replied confidently, "and I'd appreciate it if you showed him some respect." Paul's chest swelled with appreciation as he watched Linda confront his bullies. She was fearless, and it made him feel valued for the first time. The classmates exchanged glances, sensing they were outmatched, and slowly backed away, mumbling to themselves as they left the store. As the door closed behind them, Paul turned to Linda, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. I can't believe you did that for me." Linda shrugged, a soft blush creeping onto her cheeks. "You're worth it, Paul. No one deserves to be treated like that." In that moment, he recognized that their arrangement was becoming something more meaningful. She was no longer just a babysitter pretending to be his girlfriend. She was becoming his ally, someone who believed in him. As they left the store, Paul felt lighter, both from the suit and the newfound confidence Linda had instilled in him. He didn't just have a partner for the prom. He had someone who saw him for who he truly was, beyond the tech billionaire facade. Finally, the night of the prom arrived. Paul stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and apprehension. As he waited for Linda to arrive, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Would he be able to let go of his insecurities and truly enjoy the night? When the doorbell rang, he took a deep breath and opened the door. Linda stood there, radiant in a stunning dress that accentuated her figure perfectly. Her hair cascaded down in soft waves, and her smile lit up the room. "Wow," Paul breathed, unable to contain his awe. "You look amazing." "Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, her cheeks flushed with excitement. As they made their way to the car, Paul felt a sense of anticipation building within him. For the first time, he was looking forward to the night ahead. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges might come their way, and he knew that with Linda by his side, he could finally embrace the experience without fear. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the dimly lit prom venue shifted, carrying with it a sense of possibility and excitement. Paul and Linda found themselves on the edge of the dance floor, the pulsating music surrounding them as they stepped aside from the throngs of their peers. With a small, nervous laugh, Paul glanced at Linda, who was adjusting the delicate strap of her dress, her face glowing under the shimmering lights. "Can you believe we actually made it to prom?" Paul asked, his voice barely audible above the music. Linda's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I thought you'd be hiding behind those screens of yours forever. Look at you, dancing like no one's watching." Paul chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not sure it's exactly dancing, but I'm trying. Trying is a good start," she replied, her tone encouraging. They shared a smile, one that felt charged with something deeper than mere friendship. In that moment, amidst the chatter and laughter of their classmates, they both felt a sense of camaraderie, a connection that transcended their initial arrangement. "Okay, so what's next on our agenda?" Linda asked, her curiosity piqued. "Do we have a plan? Or are we just winging it?" Paul thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I guess. Let's talk about our dreams," he suggested, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "I mean, we've been pretending to be a couple. We should at least know what we're both aiming for in life, right?" "Sounds good," Linda replied enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up. "You go first." Taking a deep breath, Paul shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Well, I started my startup because I wanted to create something innovative, you know? I want to change the world in some small way. But honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm just lost. Like, is this really what I want?" Linda nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's completely normal. I think everyone feels that way at some point. For me, I've always wanted to work in environmental science. I want to make a difference in how we treat our planet. But right now, it's hard to see how I'll get there." Paul's interest peaked. "That's amazing, Linda. You could really make an impact. Have you thought about how to get started?" "Yeah, I've been looking into universities with strong programs. But honestly, it's intimidating. Sometimes I feel like I'm not smart enough or good enough to compete with everyone else." "Don't say that," Paul countered, a hint of urgency in his tone. "You're brilliant. You've been helping my brother with his homework for ages. If you can handle that, you can handle anything." Linda blushed, her cheeks turning a soft shade of pink. "Thanks, Paul. That really means a lot coming from you. You're pretty impressive yourself, you know." Their eyes locked for a fleeting moment, and Paul felt a warmth spreading in his chest. He was surprised by how easy it was to connect with her, how seamlessly their conversation flowed. Just as he was about to respond, a sudden commotion drew their attention. Paul's ex-girlfriend, Sarah, entered the venue, her presence immediately commanding attention. Dressed in a sleek, sparkling gown, she had a look of determination on her face. With her entourage trailing behind, she scanned the room until her gaze landed on Paul and Linda. A sly smile crept across her lips. "Look who's trying to play dress up," Sarah called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she approached them. Paul Sanderson, the tech nerd, and his little babysitter. "How cute." Linda stiffened beside Paul, her hand instinctively tightening around his. Paul felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. He took a step forward, meeting Sarah's gaze with a steely resolve. "Sarah, this isn't the time or place," he said firmly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Oh, but I think it is," she retorted, her tone mocking. "I can't believe you're trying to pretend you're someone you're not. Everyone knows this is just a joke." "Actually, it's not," Linda interjected, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm here with Paul because he asked me to. We're having a great time, and it's none of your business." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "You think you can just step in and play the part? You don't know him like I do." Paul felt his heart race, a mix of anger and embarrassment. "You don't get to dictate who I can be with, Sarah. I've moved on, and you should too." "Moved on? From me? You really think someone like her can fill my shoes?" Sarah laughed, her voice echoing in the crowded room. "You'll regret this, Paul. Just wait." Linda leaned closer to Paul, her expression fierce. "Let's just ignore her. She's trying to get a rise out of you, right?" Paul replied, nodding slowly, trying to shake off the tension. "Let's just enjoy our night." As Sarah walked away, Paul's heart still raced, but he felt a sense of relief as he turned back to Linda. "Thanks for standing up for me. I didn't expect that." Linda smiled, her confidence renewed. "You deserve someone who has your back. Besides, I'm not going to let her ruin our night." They exchanged a knowing look, and in that moment, it felt like they were no longer just pretending. They had become a team, united against the world. Their bond deepened, and the air around them crackled with unspoken feelings. As the night wore on and the music shifted to a slower tempo, Paul suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The cool breeze greeted them as they walked into the night, the stars twinkling overhead. "Wow, it's beautiful out here," Linda remarked, taking a deep breath. "I love how peaceful it is." "Yeah," Paul agreed, glancing at her. "Sometimes it's nice to escape the noise." They leaned against the railing, the soft sounds of the prom fading into the background. Paul turned to Linda, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure, anything," she replied, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What do you really think of this whole arrangement? Are we just playing pretend? Or do you feel something more?" Linda hesitated, her gaze drifting to the stars. "Honestly, Paul, I didn't expect to feel this way. At first, it was just a favor. But now, I feel like I found someone who sees me. You know? It's different." Paul's breath caught in his throat. "I feel the same way. I've never had anyone really see me for who I am. You make me feel real." "Real?" Linda echoed, her voice soft. "That's a big deal for someone like you." "Yeah, it is," he admitted, his vulnerability laying bare between them. "I've always been the tech guy, the socially awkward millionaire. But with you, I feel like I can just be Paul." "I like Paul," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "He's pretty amazing." A shy smile spread across Paul's face, and he took a step closer to her, the distance between them shrinking. "You're amazing too, Linda. I'm really glad you're here with me tonight." As they stood in the stillness of the evening, Paul felt the weight of his insecurities beginning to lift. He took a deep breath, contemplating the moment, the connection, the undeniable spark that flickered between them. It was as if the world had faded away, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of possibilities. Then, almost instinctively, Paul reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind Linda's ear. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, time stood still. The air around them crackled with tension, and both knew they were on the precipice of something new, something neither had anticipated. "Linda," Paul began, his voice barely above a whisper. But before he could continue, the sound of a car engine interrupted them, pulling them back to reality. The moment shattered, and they turned to see a sleek black car pulling up to the curb. Paul's heart sank as he recognized the driver, a familiar face that brought a wave of unease. It was Sarah again, her eyes glinting with mischief as she stepped out of the vehicle, her presence a stark reminder of the tumultuous emotions swirling around them. "Looks like she's back for round two," Linda said quietly, her expression shifting to one of steely resolve. "Let's just ignore her," Paul said, trying to steady his racing heart. "We don't have to let her ruin this, right?" Linda affirmed, her gaze unwavering. "We've got this." As they turned their attention back to each other, the night still held its magic, but Paul knew they were about to face a challenge that could test the bond they were beginning to forge. In that moment, he realized that whatever happened next, he didn't want to go through it without Linda by his side. The night was quiet, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions swirling within Paul Sanderson. He stood at the entrance of his expansive home, glancing at Linda as she stepped inside, her laughter still echoing from the car ride. The moment they had shared at the prom had ignited something in him, something simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. He felt a warmth bloom in his chest, a feeling he had never expected to experience. Yet, as the door closed behind them, a wave of doubt crashed over him. "Do you want something to drink?" Paul asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but it trembled slightly, betraying his internal conflict. "Sure. What do you have?" Linda replied, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She looked around the vast living room, filled with modern art pieces and sleek furniture. It was a stark contrast to the cozy, cluttered homes she was used to. We have some soda? Or I could whip up a cocktail if you want," he suggested, moving toward the kitchen, hoping the distraction would help him regain his composure. "Let's go with the cocktail. I could use something a little stronger after all that dancing," she laughed, her voice light and playful. As he reached for the cocktail shaker, he stole a glance at her. She was leaning against the counter, her hair cascading over her shoulder, a playful smile on her lips. The sight of her made his heart race. This was the girl who had stood up for him, who had danced with him as if he were the only person in the room. Yet, as he mixed the ingredients, a familiar fear gripped him. What if she was only acting? What if all of this was a game to her? A way to make the evening more exciting? "Here you go," he said, pouring the drink into a glass and sliding it toward her. "I hope I didn't make it too strong." She took a sip, her eyes widening with surprise. "Wow, Paul, this is amazing. You should be a bartender," she exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. "Thanks. Just a hobby," he replied, leaning against the counter, trying to appear casual. "So, what did you think of the prom?" "It was incredible. I never thought I'd have this much fun. You really surprised me," she said, her gaze piercing through him. "I'm glad," he said quietly, his heart racing under her scrutiny. It was nice to finally feel normal. "Normal? You were the star of the show." Linda laughed, but then her expression softened. "But I get it. It's easy to feel out of place sometimes." Paul nodded, the weight of her words resonating deeply. "I'm just not used to being in the spotlight. It's overwhelming." Linda stepped closer, her presence warm and inviting. "You handled it well. I mean, look at us. We made a pretty convincing couple," she said, her voice teasing yet sincere. "Yeah, I guess we did," he replied, his heart racing as he felt the distance between them closing. He wanted to lean in, to kiss her and let her know how he truly felt, but the dread of rejection held him back. "Paul?" Linda's voice pulled him from his thoughts, and he met her gaze, the air thick with unspoken words. "Yeah. Can I ask you something?" She looked serious now, the playfulness fading from her expression. "Of course. Anything," he said, trying to sound confident. "Do you think this whole thing is real? I mean, us pretending to be together. Do you think we're really connecting, or is it just part of the act?" Her eyes searched his, seeking clarity. Paul's heart sank. He had feared this moment would come. I don't know," he stammered, feeling the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. "I mean, I do feel something for you, But what? She pressed, her voice gentle, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. But it's scary. I've never let anyone in like this before, and I don't want to ruin what we have, he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Linda took a step back, her expression shifting from concern to contemplation. I get that. I really do. It's just, I don't want to be a placeholder in your life, Paul. If we're doing this, I want it to be real. Her words pierced through him, and he felt a pang of regret. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. I just need time to process everything. I'm not used to this, of feeling like someone actually cares about me. Linda's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his admission. I can give you time, Paul. Just don't shut me out, okay? He nodded, relief flooding through him. I promise I won't. I just need to figure things out. As the tension hung in the air, Paul felt a mix of gratitude and fear. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but his mind was racing with doubts. Would she still want to be with him once she learned about his past? About his insecurities? Before he could voice his thoughts, the ringing of her phone shattered the moment. Linda sighed, glancing at the screen. It's Sarah, she said, her expression shifting again. I should take this. Sure, go ahead, Paul replied, trying to mask his disappointment. Linda stepped away, her voice dropping to a whisper as she answered the call. Paul busied himself with the remnants of their drinks, stealing glances at her as she spoke. He could see the concern etching lines on her forehead, and he couldn't help but feel a tinge of jealousy. Who was this Sarah? What could be so important that it pulled her away from him in this moment? Yeah, I'm fine, he heard her say, though her tone was a mix of annoyance and amusement. No, it's not like that. Paul as well, we're just friends. His heart sank at her words. Just friends? Was that all he was to her? So, you're saying you're dating a millionaire now? That sounds like a movie plot. Sarah's voice rang through the phone, causing Linda to roll her eyes. It's not like that. It's complicated, Linda replied, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of hair. Paul turned away, feeling a wave of insecurity wash over him. What if all this was just a phase for her? What if she had only been acting to help him, and now that the prom was over, she was ready to return to her normal life, leaving him behind? Okay, I'll talk to you later, Linda said, hanging up and returning to where Paul stood, his heart heavy with doubt. Everything okay? He asked, forcing a smile. Yeah, Sarah just wanted to check in. She's skeptical about this whole relationship thing, Linda said, biting her lip, her gaze shifting away from him. Paul felt a knot form in his stomach. What do you mean? She thinks it's just a game, you know? That we're faking it, she said, her voice laced with uncertainty. Do you think that? He asked, his heart racing as he waited for her answer. I don't know, Paul. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just caught up in the fantasy of it all, she admitted, her honesty cutting deeper than he anticipated. He swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I don't want this to be a game, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't either, she replied softly, her eyes searching his. But how do we know what's real? Paul opened his mouth to respond but found no words. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears. The last thing he wanted was to push her away, but the thought of losing her, of her realizing he wasn't worthy of her affection, terrified him. Suddenly, he heard her voice again, distant yet clear, as if she were speaking to him from a great distance. I need to think about this, Paul. I don't want to get hurt. As she spoke, he felt his heart clench. He understood the fear behind her words. He felt it too. They were standing on the precipice of something beautiful yet terrifying, and he was afraid to take that final step. Neither do I, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. I just wish I knew what to do. With that, the air grew heavier, the uncertainty settling between them like a thick fog. Paul's mind raced, and as he looked into Linda's eyes, he knew they were both at a crossroads, wondering if they could traverse the vast unknown together or if they would retreat back into their separate lives, forever wondering what could have been. In the soft morning light filtering through the sheer curtains of his spacious bedroom, Paul Sanderson lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind, like a movie that refused to stop. The prom had been a whirlwind of emotions, joy, anxiety, exhilaration. But now, with the dawn of a new day, a heavy weight settled on his chest. After overhearing Linda's doubts about their feelings, he felt a pang of heartbreak that he couldn't shake off. He turned his head toward the clock, 8:30 a.m. He had promised himself he would talk to Linda today, to clear the air. But what would he say? "I'm scared of losing you?" It sounded ridiculous, even to his own ears. He sighed deeply, running a hand through his tousled hair. Meanwhile, Linda Miller was sitting in her tiny apartment, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into her palms, but the turmoil in her heart felt much colder. She couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that had washed over her after her friend's call. Was this relationship merely a facade, a convenient arrangement that had spiraled out of control? The thought gnawed at her, and she felt a mix of confusion and longing when she thought of Paul. Her phone buzzed against the table, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from her friend, Hannah, who had been skeptical about the whole fake girlfriend setup from the beginning. "You really think it's real?" Hannah texted. "Or are you just fooling yourself?" Linda stared at the screen, her heart racing. She wanted to respond with certainty, to say that it was real, that she and Paul shared something profound. But deep down, doubts lingered, and she couldn't find the right words. She took a sip of her coffee, trying to drown her worries, when another message popped up. This one was from an unknown number, and as she opened it, her stomach dropped. "Did you hear the news? Paul's just using you to look good. Everyone knows you're just his babysitter. Hashtag fake relationship." Linda's breath hitched in her throat. The words felt like daggers, piercing through her confidence. She quickly scrolled through her social media, the dread building inside her. Posts were flooding in, mocking her and Paul's relationship. The comments were relentless, ranging from ridicule to straight-up cruelty. Her heart sank as she read one that said, "Looks like the nerd finally got a pretty girl. Just don't expect her to stick around, right?" Struggling to hold back tears, Linda put down her phone. How could someone be so cruel? The laughter of high school peers echoed in her mind, and she felt the familiar sting of rejection. She had always been the one overlooked, the invisible girl in the background. Now, it seemed, she was being thrust back into that role, but this time with a spotlight that felt excruciatingly bright. Across town, Paul was pacing in his office, his mind racing with thoughts of Linda. He had been trying to focus on work, but the nagging worry about her well-being consumed him. He grabbed his phone, his fingers hovering over her contact. He needed to reach out, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But the moment he pressed the call button, a notification popped up and his heart sank. Trending: Paul Sanderson's fake girlfriend scandal. His stomach churned as he clicked on the link. The article detailed the events of the prom night, mocking him and Linda, insinuating that their relationship was nothing more than a publicity stunt. Comments beneath the article were filled with laughter and sarcasm, and Paul felt the heat rising to his face. Each word felt like a personal attack, not just on him, but on Linda too. "Damn it," he muttered, frustration boiling over. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let this happen. They had shared something genuine, something he had never thought he could feel with anyone. And now, it was being tarnished by the cruel whims of social media. Paul made a decision. He would stand up for Linda, for their relationship. It was time to confront the situation head-on. He quickly typed out a message to Linda, his fingers flying over the screen. "Linda, I need to talk to you. Meet me at our cafe. It's important." Hurrying out of his office, he made his way to the cafe, his heart racing with each step. He hoped that she would be there, that she hadn't seen the article or the comments. And if she had, he needed to be there to support her, to show her that he was not ashamed of her, not even for a second. When he arrived, he spotted Linda seated at a corner table, her eyes glued to her phone, her expression a mixture of sadness and disbelief. His heart twisted at the sight. She looked so beautiful, yet so vulnerable. Gathering his courage, he approached her. "Linda," he said softly, taking a seat across from her. She looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to apprehension. "Paul," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Have you seen what they're saying?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. Her gaze dropped to the table, and he could see the hurt in her eyes. "I did," she admitted. It's humiliating." "Listen," he said, leaning forward, his intensity rising. "What they're saying doesn't define us. I don't care what they think. I care about you." She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "But they're right, Paul. I'm just your babysitter. This was all a game to you." "No, it wasn't," he insisted, shaking his head vehemently. "I hired you because I needed someone who could help me navigate that world. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel things. Real things." Linda's breath hitched as she met his gaze, searching for sincerity. "You can't seriously think this is real. I mean, what do you see in me?" "I'm just me." "You're so much more than that," he replied, desperation creeping into his voice. "You're smart, funny, and you stood up for me when no one else would. That means something. You mean something to me." Tears brimmed in her eyes, and she took a shaky breath. "But what about the rumors? How can we ever make this work?" Paul reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "We face it together. I'll defend you, Linda. I won't let them tear us apart." She squeezed his hand, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. "You really mean that?" "Absolutely," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "I'm ready to fight for us, for whatever this is." In that moment, surrounded by the noise of the cafe, they shared a silent understanding, a bond forged in the midst of chaos. As they sat together, hand in hand, the weight of the world outside seemed a little lighter. The rumors, the ridicule, they would face it together, and somehow that made all the difference. Linda felt her heart swell with gratitude and affection for the man sitting across from her. "Then let's do it," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "Let's show them that this isn't just a game." Paul smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. Together, he affirmed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. As they left the cafe hand in hand, ready to confront the storm ahead, neither of them could have anticipated the twists that awaited them. But for the first time, they felt like they could take on anything. Together, Paul Sanderson stood in his sleek, modern office, the glow of the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Yet, despite the outward success reflected in his surroundings, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. The revelation that Linda Miller, his charming faux girlfriend, was the daughter of his father's long-standing business rival had struck him like a thunderbolt. He clutched the edge of his desk, struggling to process the implications of this new information. How could everything feel so right with her one moment and so wrong the next? He paced the polished wood floors, his mind racing. Memories of their time together flooded back, the laughter, the shared dreams, the way she looked at him as if he were more than just a tech billionaire. Every moment they had shared now felt tainted by the realization of her lineage. She must have known, he muttered to himself, anger and betrayal bubbling beneath the surface. Just as the storm within him reached a fever pitch, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was Linda. She stepped inside, hesitantly, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Paul, can we talk?" He wanted to shout, to demand how she could betray him, but the sight of her, vulnerable, yet resolute, stopped him. "What's there to talk about, Linda? You're the daughter of the man who tried to ruin my company." Her eyes widened, a flicker of hurt crossing her features. "I didn't know, Paul. I swear. I didn't even know who you were until after we started this. Whatever this is." She took a step closer, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I care about you. I thought we had something real." "Real?" he echoed, his heart aching with the conflict of emotions. "How can it be real when your family has been trying to tear me down for years? How can I trust you?" "Trust?" she repeated, hurt evident in her voice. "You don't even know me. You think I chose my family? Just like you didn't choose yours. I'm not my father, Paul. I'm not the enemy here." The tension in the room crackled like electricity as Paul's anger began to dissipate, replaced by confusion and sorrow. "Then what do we do? This changes everything." Linda took a deep breath, her composure unwavering. We face it together. I'm not going to let my family's past dictate our future. You mean too much to me for that. Paul studied her, searching for any hint of deception, but all he found was sincerity. You really mean that? He asked softly. Of course I do. We can't let this drive us apart. If we allow the past to control us, we'll never have a chance at happiness. For the first time since the revelation, Paul felt a glimmer of hope. You're right. What do you suggest we do? First, we need to expose the truth about your ex-girlfriend, Linda proposed, her eyes lighting up with determination. She's the one who's been spreading lies about us. If we bring everything to light, we can clear our names and show that we're stronger than this. Paul's heart swelled with admiration. Linda had always possessed a fierce spirit, and this was no exception. Okay, let's do it. Together. The following day, Paul and Linda set out to gather evidence of his ex-girlfriend's malicious acts. They spent hours sifting through social media posts, gathering screenshots and messages, and compiling a comprehensive dossier of her lies. As they worked side by side, the bond between them strengthened, their shared determination weaving a new layer of intimacy into their relationship. Look at this, Linda said, pointing at her laptop screen. She's been posting fake stories about you and tagging me in them. This is not just petty. This is defamation. Paul frowned, anger bubbling up again. She's trying to ruin you, Linda. I can't believe she'd go this far. I can, Linda replied, her jaw set with resolve. People like her don't care about anyone but themselves. But we're not going to let her win. After compiling their evidence, they decided to confront Paul's ex-girlfriend publicly. They scheduled a meeting at a local cafe where they knew she frequented. The day of the meeting, Paul and Linda arrived early, their hearts racing with a mix of anxiety and excitement. When his ex-girlfriend, Kelly, walked in, her confident demeanor quickly shifted to one of surprise upon seeing them together. "What are you two doing here?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "We need to talk, Kelly," Paul said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "About the lies you've been spreading." Kelly scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Oh please, do you think anyone believes you're really with her? You must be desperate." Linda stepped forward, her voice firm. "It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. We have proof of everything you've said and done. You're going to be held accountable." Kelly's expression morphed from arrogance to panic as Paul pulled out his phone, displaying the evidence they had gathered. "You think this is a joke?" he asked, his voice steady. "Wait, no," Kelly stammered, the color draining from her face. "You can't do this." "I'm already doing it," Paul replied, feeling a surge of empowerment. "You've tried to ruin my life and Linda's, and we're not going to let you get away with it." As they exposed Kelly's lies on social media, the tide began to shift. Support flooded in from friends and classmates who had witnessed Kelly's behavior. Within hours, the narrative had changed, and Paul and Linda found themselves at the center of a movement to hold her accountable. In the midst of the chaos, they leaned on each other for support. "I can't believe we did it," Linda said breathlessly, her eyes shining. "You're so brave, Paul." "No, we did it together," he replied, his heart swelling with pride. "You were right all along. We're stronger as a team." As the dust settled and Kelly faced the fallout of her actions, Paul and Linda stood together, hand in hand. The weight of the world felt lighter as they finally embraced the truth of their relationship. Their backgrounds may have been intertwined in conflict, but love had transcended that. "Whatever challenges come next, we can face them together," Linda said, her voice steady and full of conviction. Paul nodded, a smile breaking across his face. "I'll always have your back, Linda, and I know you'll have mine." In that moment, they knew that their love story was just beginning, and they were ready to take on whatever the world threw at them, united in their resolve to forge a future free from the shadows of their pasts.